Good morning. Welcome to today's Northfield City Council Candidate Forum, sponsored by the Northfield Area Chamber of Commerce and our media partners, KYMN Radio and the Northfield News. I am Todd Bornhauser, President of the Northfield Area Chamber of Commerce and Tourism, and will be one of today's moderators. Joining me this morning is Terry Knight, News Editor for KYMN Radio. The timekeepers for today's forum will be Todd Anderson of Dick Sanitation and Lindsay Reddy of the Northfield Area Chamber of Commerce and Tourism. I would now like to introduce each 2017 City Council candidate. First, Mr. Greg Colby is seeking the at-large council position. Mr. Colby, 64, is a current City Council member and also served on the council in the mid-1990s. Greg is an attorney and an instructor at Inver Hills Community College. Next, we have Mr. Joe Dennison is seeking, I will make that mistake once and only once. Mr. John Dennison is seeking the at-large council position. Mr. Dennison, 45, served on the City Council from 2006 to 2010 and has served on the Northfield Library Board and presently serves on the Charter Commission. John works in the healthcare industry. Finally, Mr. Don McGee is seeking the at-large council position. Mr. McGee, 79, has served on the Rental Board of Appeals, Building Court of Appeals, and numerous mayoral task force. Mr. McGee has lived in Northfield for 55 years and has 4 children and 4 grandchildren. And Mr. McGee is currently retired. The format of today's forum will be as follows. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for introductions and opening remarks. Then each candidate will receive up to 2 minutes to respond to each question. Finally, each candidate will receive 2 minutes for wrap-up and closing remarks. Moderators will take turns asking questions. The chamber staff determine the order of the candidates. Are there any questions? Okay, Let's get started. Opening remarks. Mr. Colby, 2 minutes for your opening remarks.
Okay, thank you. My name is Greg Colby. I'm running for the City Council at Large position. I have been the City Council representative for the city for the last year. I am retired. I haven't practiced law for about 5 years. I'm currently involved with the American Legion, the Inver Hills Community College. I will be teaching there in the winter, and with City Council. I served for 3 years on the council back in the 90s. I served on the Planning Commission for 5 years. I was also the chair of that commission. I've been a resident, seems I'm the junior member up here, for only 33 years. And during my career, I was a public defender for 20 years. Let me start by saying I think it was a good year for Northfield. We have 2 new brew pubs. We have a new restaurant. We have continuing construction on the integrated science facility at Carleton. The Holland Hall renovation is moving forward. Kiplinger magazine named Northfield as one of the 10 best places in the country to retire. We are doing something right. Now, has the City Council accomplished anything in the last year? I believe it has. The fire station renovation plans have been approved. We've adopted a strategic plan. We've adopted a city art policy. After the departure of our finance director, we hired an independent firm to provide financial services for the city until a new finance director was in place. We implemented a pay plan. We approved curbside compost pickup. We appointed a new finance director. We completed an evaluation of our city administrator. We approved a solar energy subscription to cover more than half of city government's energy needs. We're doing well. We also funded a new bookmobile with the help from the Minneapolis Foundation and other community friends. We're doing well, and we ought to continue this. Thank you.
Mr. Dennison, 2 minutes for your opening remarks.
I'm John Dennison. I served on the City Council, as it was said earlier, for 4 years. As a 4th Ward representative, I'm running for the at-large position now. I've been a resident of Northfield for 43 years. I attended the only 3 years I was away, I attended college in South Florida for music and video business. I'm a newlywed, having just gotten married in July. My wife is an OLE graduate and an RN. When I was on the city council, we accomplished quite in my opinion, prestigious list of things, considering the challenges we faced at that time with some personalities. We funded the police station, the new one out by Perkins, restaurant and transportation. We did studies on public library renovation. I was on the library board when that finally got going and the renovation happened. I've been educated in Northfield. Went to Northfield School Districts. I'm a longtime Northfielder, and I think one of my strongest characteristics is that I really love Northfield, and I know what it's like. I know what it really, really means to be a Northfielder. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McGee, 2 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you to the Chamber for having us here today. I'm Don McGee. As you said, I've been in town 55 years. Much of that time, I have to say, I was not very involved in the city. I would appear before the city council when there were special issues that I was concerned with. Probably the first meeting I attended was in when the chamber was, or the council was meeting in the basement of the city hall, of the safety center. Keith Covey, the first, was the mayor, and I was there to bring my scout troop in to learn about the workings of the city. Since then, I have been involved in several things. 2006, I and some neighbors appeared here in the council with some concerns we had about rental issues in our neighborhood, which turned into a 2-year campaign working with the city and the colleges, where I made many friends, seriously, and we eventually came to some conclusions that I think have made big improvements to the city in that area. I've worked with the non-motorized transportation group. I was instrumental in getting the timed lights at Highway 3 and 2nd Street, pushed for other pedestrian improvements in the city. And since 2006, I've probably attended more meetings than any elected official and have raised several questions that I have not had response to, and see this is an opportunity to raise some of those questions from this side of the dais. Specifically, I want to talk sometime tonight about the finances in the city and the way they're monitored, and the boards and commissions and the way they are being used and abused in the city. Thank you.
All right, gentlemen, again, you have 2 minutes to answer the question. The question is, what are your aspirations behind wanting to be on the city council for the city of Northfield? Mr. Dennison, you go first.
I want to stop the egregious spending. I believe the current city council hasn't seen a plan or a facility or an idea they don't want to fund. They're, in my opinion, lousy at budgeting and lousy at making priorities. They're talking about an 8.5% property tax levy on top of the school district making their proposal to increase taxes. The county wants 6%. How much is enough? In my opinion, if this council doesn't have some kind of check and balance put in place, and with some of the projects they intend to fund, They do need a supermajority to get them funded, so one counselor can make a heck of a difference. If somebody doesn't step up and say enough's enough, I'm afraid that workforce housing and affordable housing in Northfield will no longer exist.
Thank you. Mr. McGee, what are your aspirations?
I have two issues that I want to have a chance to pursue. If I would do nothing else in the coming year, I would, one, push to get the city council to direct the staff to provide monthly financial reports. Section 9.1 of the charter says, "The council shall have full authority over the financial affairs of the city." Yet, the council gets no financial report, monthly financial reports. Anybody that has a bank account knows you get a financial report every month. Anybody that's in business knows the end of the month, you better know what's going on with your business. The council gets none of that information. They sporadically get quarterly reports that are very lacking in information. The city is a $27 million a year business with $30 million in the bank, and we're not paying any attention. We spend it. When somebody tells the staff says, yeah, we've got it, it's in the budget, we can spend it. The council is not paying attention to the details of the finance. I hope later, I want to go on to the other thing, so I'm not going to talk about the 8.5% levy right now. Is boards and commissions. We have 16 boards and commissions in this town with over 100 members of people that are experts in the field that they've chosen. They're passionate about an area, and they're there to serve. They are, by the charter, they are advisory bodies to the council. They are not being used at all to get their expertise involved in the city. I see it that we have a council, we have a staff, and we have boards and commissions. The boards and commissions are not being listened to. They're not being used in the way that lends their voice to the voice of the community to the decisions being made.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Colby, your aspirations.
Well, to keep going, there's a lot to get done. We've adopted a strategic plan. I think it ought to be followed. But let's deal with each of the issues raised by Mr. Dennison and Mr. McGee. First of all, we still have our AA bonding. Second, we're getting financial reports at every meeting. We meet twice a month. Third, we have a financial audit that's done every year. That financial audit did not come back and say we had any major problems. So I think we're getting the financial information that we need. As for lousy budgeting, that is always, a debatable item. The initial proposal before the city council was to raise our levy by over 10%. What we passed was 8.5%, and I think there's a fair shot it may end up at 8%. We don't have exclusive control over how much real estate taxes are raised in a given year. John is absolutely right that there are two other entities that have an impact on that. That is the school district and Rice County. We're the third player in that. So we can't, we don't have the ability to freeze real estate tax increases by ourselves. We can do it for the city. How do you continue to run an effective city government? You have to pay your people well. Over 6% of the levy increase for the city is tied up to the pay plan implementation, which is an increase in city employee wages. You have to pay your people decently or they won't stay. We have good people. We need to keep them. That will provide effective services. And I've run out of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Question number 2. Thank you. Question number 2. Remember, each candidate will have up to 2 minutes to answer the following question. And we'll start with you, Mr. McGee. What is your hot button issue?
Okay, I think I've already touched on that, and so I'm going to continue it. On financial side of it. Mr. Colby's right. We do get reports occasionally. The report he's talking about that comes at the council every meeting is strictly just a disbursement. It's a list of every check that the city has issued. He did mention also that we did bring in a outside, let's call it them attempt to work in place of the financial administrator who had resigned. That person or persons published probably the best quarterly report I've ever seen, and if anybody wants to see a copy of it, I'll get you to it. But one thing that report tells us, that was second quarter, so through June, the expenditures in the city were 8.2%, 8.2% less than the budget. In other words, we had underspent by $460,000 halfway through this year. If we project that out to the end of the year, that's over $900,000 excess money that we've collected. And this is exactly what we are talking about raising, the levy for next year. So we're actually going to be paying this twice. And let's recognize that 8.5% is not 85% of what we're spending this year. It's 85% of this year's budget, which we're not spending. So we're increasing our expenditures over and above what we need to operate the city.
Thank you. Mr. Colby, what is your hot button issue?
Well, I can't say that I have a single issue that drives me. I am terribly interested in effective government. After I served on the city council the first time, I have to admit I was just driven to figure things out more, so I went and got a master's degree in public administration at Mankato State. It was a wonderful experience. And I understand the whole issue about bureaucracy and budgeting a lot better than I did when I served back in the 90s. For me, the issues that keep pushing me are connecting Northfield. How do we stay connected digitally? How do we stay connected or get connected by rail? This bicycle connection, I felt like a lot of people that bicycle connection's a big deal. But if you go and you look at the lodging tax increases down in Rushford, what is it? It's not Freeborn County, the county next to it. And you look at how those lodging tax increases have occurred over the last 20 years. I mean, it is substantial. We're not talking 10%, 50%. We're talking several 100%. So being connected is a big deal. Maintaining the downtown. We have one of the best downtowns, not in Minnesota, but in the upper Midwest. Travel all over Wisconsin, North Dakota, South Dakota. You can't find a better downtown than we've got. Red Wing will give us some competition. But the challenge is to do this within a reasonable set of costs. How do we do that? I had a wonderful conversation with someone I see at the grocery store all the time. She's been working there for many years, and she complained to me about the potential rise in real estate taxes. And her complaint was, how do I continue to afford to live here? That is a legitimate question, and it's fair. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dennison, what is your hot button issue?
I'm a big advocate for affordable housing, but that's tied to ultimately what I keep pushing over and over again is budgeting. If the city of Northfield is underspending its budget by approximately what the proposed levy increase is, it brings to mind something I actually heard a counselor say in these chambers, that they wish they had a slush fund of money that was available so they could spend on whatever great idea plops in their lap. I think the residents of this community deserve to know what their taxes are going for, and not this pie in the sky wish list, oh, we might get a great idea. There will not be affordable housing in Northfield because property tax increases go towards tenants, obviously homeowners. home sharers, Airbnbs, all kinds of people pay into this. But if the city is not budgeting correct, and I don't buy this excuse of we need to pay our people well. Yes, I believe we need to pay our people well, but what are your priorities in your budget? What could you cut out to pay your people well? I think when I was on the council, we kept property taxes. I think we only increased it one of the 4 years I was there. We looked at our budget, decided what our priorities were, and lived within our means, which is what your typical blue-collar working-class family has to do. And it's what I believe needs to be done by the city, or you're going to price the workforce out of being able to live here. They're going to start looking 30 miles away for jobs that pay a few bucks more, and then they'll start moving elsewhere as well.
Thank you.
All right. Gentlemen, what are your thoughts on the Waterford Township Agreement? What compromise would you make, if any? We'll start with Mr. McGee.
My thoughts on the Waterford issue is that I find it embarrassing as a citizen of Northfield to have to even face my friends from Waterford when they ask why are we doing this. What we're doing, of course, is saying we don't have to own up to an agreement we have with them to pay them a yearly stipend plus honor a annexation agreement. What do I think we should do? I think we should do what we should have done a long time ago, is if we believe that that agreement is obsolete or needs changing, is go in peer to peer and discuss with them, explain our concerns, find their concerns, and find a mutually acceptable way of modifying the agreement if that's what they want. My approach would be, if there's some concern about the ongoing payment, is to buy it out. Pay them everything we owe them to date and a cash payment to say, okay, well, there's no more payment. And I happen to believe that they probably are more concerned about the annexation agreement. Waterford is one of the smallest townships in the state, and their income is highly dependent on the business along Highway 3. It would be not real hard for Northfield to just annex all of their tax-generating property, and I think that would be something that we should not think of doing, and I think they want protection, so we don't do it. So I would say negotiate a contract, if you don't want to continue it, a buyout agreement plus a continuing annexation agreement that's compatible to both of us. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. McGee. Mr. Colby, what are your thoughts on the Waterford Township Agreement, and what compromise would you make, if any?
I have a two-part answer. The first part is that I think you ought to treat your neighbors well. And I think our relations with our neighbors are pretty good. I mean, we've got the NAFRS group in the fire station. That body is NAFRS is Northfield, Dundas, and the Rural Fire District, which I believe also includes Waterford. We're working together, so we are getting along with our neighbors. That project is moving forward. However, I have a duty to protect the voters, the people, the citizens of Northfield. The legislature determined a year after the agreement was made with Waterford, or 2 years later, that such agreements could not be made. It's my understanding that the agreement that was made is basically unenforceable. If that's the case, how can I give away taxpayer money because it makes me feel better to be a nice person, or whatever term you want to use, to my neighbor? I have a duty to protect taxpayer money. I made the suggestion in the city council meeting that we mediate with Waterford. I don't believe there's been a response. The proposal that mediation proposal was made several months ago. Maybe they've responded. I'm not aware of it. But mediation is the way to go. Going into court is extremely expensive. We had to sit down with them and see, is there some way that we can conclude this? But it's unenforceable, so paying money is not smart.
All right, Mr. Dennison, same question.
I was on the council that put the stop to the payments. I believe any good attorney would advise you that an agreement with no ending date on it is unenforceable. I had a fiduciary responsibility to the citizens of Northfield. I don't believe this contract is enforceable, primarily because it has no ending date. Are we supposed to just give away taxpayers' money in perpetuity? I don't think so. Waterford's problem, I believe, is if you go to Waterford, you'll see neighborhoods that look exactly like neighborhoods in Northfield. They're trying to be a city, and townships are not supposed to be cities. If they want to have neighborhoods like that, they should be annexed by the city, who can provide their residents with the proper services that they should demand, and not rely on Waterford to be doing these things. I had a fiduciary responsibility to the city, and I don't believe that contract is enforceable. And I think they know it's not enforceable. Otherwise, there would have been a lawsuit. This has been many years where they've disputed the non-payment of these so-called payments. So if this contract was valid, they would have done something about it. So.
Thank you. All right, we'll move to the next question, and we'll start with you, Mr. Colby. What will you do to help the city grow its economic development to assist the existing businesses and citizens with their growing tax obligations?
How do we help the city grow? How do we help citizens with their real estate taxes? Okay. The biggest challenges for downtown, it seems to me, are parking and real estate taxes. When I walk around and talk to business people, that's what I hear. The challenge of parking has been around for a long time. I believe that the Northfield Downtown Development Corporation should be devoting a significant amount of time to looking for the various studies that have been conducted and to identify things that might be possible. Second, we ought to look into a parking ramp behind downtown. It's an ideal spot, but those things are not cheap. And how that gets paid for is a real challenge. As for the real estate tax problem, that is tough. I don't have quick flip answers off the top of my head. As for the business environment, our business environment is good. We ought to keep doing what we do. Look at the number of businesses that we have in town. We got Multec, we got Multimeal, we've got Cardinal Glass, McLean's Trucking is here and is fairly new. We are doing something right. We need to continue to do that. We have demonstrated that we are willing to use tax increment financing to assist businesses. As for getting a big stellar company in here, that's always been the challenge. It was a challenge 20 years ago. The last large business that I recall coming into town was Cardinal Glass. So it is a continuing challenge. But we have good people in place in community development. I think that is a key part of it. So I think we keep doing what we're doing. We try to find a way to tackle this real estate tax problem, and we go after the parking issue, and we go after it aggressively. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dennison, what will you do to help the city grow its economic development to assist the existing businesses and citizens with their growing tax obligations?
Again, I think it comes down to budgeting. I don't think it's appropriate to build a tax ramp at the a parking ramp at the taxpayer's expense. The downtown businesses are already egregiously overtaxed. To ask them to pay higher taxes for a parking ramp that, as a Northfielder, as a avid walker and user of downtown Northfield, I don't see this parking issue. I think the parking downtown can be addressed in other issues, but in other ways. Enforcement of parking, put some rules in place about parking at certain times. This issue of the downtown parking can be addressed in other ways. I think the biggest thing that Northfield can do with its limited ability to really attract new business to Northfield is to put infrastructure out by the hospital. That land was annexed with the idea of it being an industrial park. I believe the future of Northfield is tied very strongly to the medical community. I think the hospital has some very strong plans that they may or may not have even made public about their growth ideas, but then there are the support services that come with medical community. Northfield's always talked about as a college community, this town and gown connection. I think the medical community is Northfield's future, and I think it's a bright future. And I would do things as a counselor to encourage the growth in that industry.
Thank you. Mr. McGee, what will you do to help the city grow its economic development to assist the existing businesses and citizens with their growing tax obligations?
Okay, I'd like to address one term you use, economic development. I think that's a term that's misused, overused, and misunderstood in Northfield. Economic development sounds like an action. What do we want to accomplish? What are our goals? How are we going to know when we have it? And specifically, let's talk about two things. You talk about existing businesses. One, I think they should be at the table. We're here with the chamber. Way back to the Rossing administration, I kept asking questions about, well, why aren't the business people being allowed to come to work sessions and express their needs and concerns? I don't think the city council has the expertise to decide what it is best for these small businesses without input from them. So one, I would advocate for a joint effort between the council and the chamber, and as a representative of those businesses, to what really should the city be doing. An example I know they should be doing, issue of the improvement at Division and 7th. I know some business people have come to the council and expressed concern. They're losing parking places. They're having business disruptions. The modifications may not help their business. And they're doing it very firmly and politely. And I get the feeling that nobody's paying attention to them. That, yeah, okay, you want more parking places, but we're going ahead with our plan. They are not being heard by the council. I would certainly want them to be heard. In terms of the tax issue, if I were on the council this year, I would propose no tax increase. I don't think there's a need for it. And if there's money in the coffers to have budget amendments to get you through the year. But year after year, where do we get this money? $1 million for the library, $600,000 by the police department property, on and on. This money comes up because it's been collected because they're collecting more than they need every year. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question, we'll start with Mr. Dennison. Should the city spend up to $4 million to build a new liquor store with a return on investment of 2 to 3%?
Oh, absolutely not. I like Steve DeLong, the liquor store manager, but this is his job. He's not going to come and tell you the numbers aren't there for a profit margin to build a new store. He just wants to help his employees and run the best business he can. I respect that. I just think it's something, the idea of a municipal liquor store is something from the past. It worked to control the proliferation of liquor stores in a community so that you didn't have a liquor store on every corner. But now with the commuting populace that we have, most people do a lot of their shopping by where they work. And when you have to drive 30 miles or 30 minutes or 2 hours, you're going to do a lot of your shopping near where you work because that's where you're spending most of your time. I don't believe the city should be spending $4 to $5 million on a new liquor store. I think we can help economic development in town by supporting our local businesses and ending the municipal monopoly on liquor and allowing our local grocers and other businesses to compete with what's happening in the community and let them sell alcohol. They already have the overhead. They can expand their businesses to include this. They already have the infrastructure necessary to do it. They'll be able to better manage, and they will profit and be competitive in our region. And I think we should open up that possibility.
All right, thank you. Mr. Colby, same question.
Thank you. Well, there are three options that have been proposed in the recent study. Putting a new liquor store adjacent to Econo Foods, putting one at the corner of 7th and Division, putting one next to the quarterback on Highway 3. The cost of a liquor store at Econo Foods would be between $2.5 million and $3.2 million. Whether it was at the second option or the third option, it would be between 3.6 and 4.6 million bucks. I received a letter from Jim Schlichting, a resident of Northfield, who addressed this at length and was quite persuasive. He said that if we can get funding at or a loan at 1.5%, we'll be paying $102,000 in interest and principal per year. If it's at 3%, it'd be $123,800 per year, and that's a 30-year payback. He said that doesn't include repairs and maintenance issues. He said if you assume an annual profit of $200,000 per year, it's not enough. Your question is, would I support building a liquor store for $4.4 million? The answer is no. The real question is, would I support it at $2.5 million? At this point, I'm not persuaded, that's for sure. I think Mr. Dennison is right on the money when he says, local business and capitalism should be allowed to operate and function. Let them provide that. But it's possible that there are some benefits to having that liquor store. And, we've got to look at all the information. I'm not going to make am I done with my time? Okay. I'm not going to make a pledge at this point because I don't have all the information. But based on Mr. Schlichting's letter, I'm having problems. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And Mr. McGee. Do you want me to read the question again?
No, that's okay. Liquor store. Liquor store, no. None of the options that are presented make any fiscal sense at all. Historically, the liquor store has actually made a profit of probably close to $200,000, based that on the fact that they've added $125,000 to the general fund. They have funded the mayor's task force on alcohol and drug abuse, and they have managed to accumulate $1 million in reserve. Now, right now, we have to recognize the liquor store is a retail business, completely independent of anything else the city does, not like running the water department or the waste treatment plant. And so it should be treated as a business. As long as they can make a profit, I'd say let's keep them. I think they're an amenity to town. I like the people, good service. At the point where they can no longer provide a positive cash flow to the city, I think it's time to get out of the business. You just have to be hard-nosed about being in the retail business. If you took the present plan to a bank as a private individual or company, you'd be laughed out. There's no way that you would spend $2 million or $4 million or $6 million to generate profits of $80,000 or $90,000 a year. So I'd say if they can come back with a liquor store plan that shows that they can continue to generate profits, keep it going as long as you can, and then bite the bullet and say, okay, we're out of the business, we'll turn it over to the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, next question, and we'll start with you, Mr. Colby. The preliminary city budget for 2018 will result in a levy increase right now of 8.5%. What is your opinion on this increase?
Well, first of all, 6.2% of that levy increase is due to the pay plan implementation. That works out to about $513,000, $500,000. The pay plan began with a study that was approved by the City Council on July 5th, 2016, before I was on the City Council. They approved a contract with McGrath Human Resources Group to study a variety of issues involving pay. Among other things, they agreed to establish internal equity among city positions, present options and assistance selecting and designing a pay structure for the city, find and compare our pay to other comparable cities, and evaluate and recommend a pay system that complied with Minnesota's Local Government Pay Equity Act. Implementation of the changes that were recommended by the McGrath Human Resources Group was approved on March 7, 2017, when I was on the City Council. One of the things that I learned when I was studying public administration and the operation of local government is that one of the keys to operating effective government is having good employees. If you want to see the challenges of paying people very little and asking a great deal from them, study local government in the South. One of the major local government corruptions occurred in Oklahoma and in Mississippi, where they don't pay people very much. Now, those scandals occurred 30 years ago, so admittedly, I don't have something contemporaneous, but you have to pay your people well. If you want people to have a corporate memory, you want them to be loyal, you want them to give that extra effort, you have to pay them appropriately. Saying thank you is not enough. One of the big debates going on in the state, I've run out of time, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dennison, the preliminary city budget for 2018 will result in a levy increase of right now 8.5%. What is your opinion on this increase?
I think it's well documented. I'm against the levy increase. I'm not against paying your people what they're worth. According to what Mr. McGee has said about the numbers, the money is there. It's whether or not the city makes paying its people a priority. And how high they rank that priority. I work in an industry with high turnover. I recognize you have to pay your people to keep them here. I've seen a lot of turnover in my time on the council. When I was on the council, we went through 3 city administrators and a plethora of department heads. I fully understand that. I just think it comes down to budgeting and prioritization of that. I think the money is there to pay your people. There are other things that the city could look at and not consider as high a priority. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. McGee, the preliminary city budget for 2018 will result in a levy increase of right now 8.5%. What is your opinion on this increase?
I think I've already said my opinion is that it's not necessary. Let's talk about the pay increases. I think it's a little less than 6%, but let's use 6%. That's 6% increase in the labor cost. The labor cost is X% of the total budget. I know it's a big part. I confess I haven't studied it. I don't know. But let's say it's 70, that labor is 70% of our city budget. Well, 70% of the 6% is we're down to 4%. So even if we said that we have to pay that increased pay, that would only be a 4% increase. Why is it 8%? And I sincerely believe that the money is there and that all of the projections provided by the city say that we are going to have surplus this year to cover the whole 8% next year. So there is no reason. Mr. Dennison mentioned this slush fund, and I think that's exactly what we do year after year. There is a slush fund in our budget that there's money to pull out when we have a pet project. That is not the way it is supposed to work. Auditors have pointed out in the past reports to the city saying, hey, if you're going to collect excess money, you have to tell the taxpayers what it's for. You can't just kind of put it in a pile and pull it out at a whim. There are rules and regulations that say if you're collecting money for a library or a ice rink or whatever, that's fine as long as you tell the taxpayers you're doing it and do it in an open manner rather than creating this false impression that, hey, we're really got a tight budget and we're pushing it, and then we end up with having money in the so-called slush fund. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next question. Does the LDC impede life cycle housing being built in Northfield? And what changes would you make to stimulate development? Mr. McGee, we'll start with you.
Okay, can you help me with the term you used there? What, life cycle?
Life cycle housing is starter home to upgrade to maybe another upgrade to senior housing.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, I'm not sure I see the LDC as a factor one way or the other. Now, maybe some contractor can explain to me there's some circumstances, but I think ultimately it's the market that's going to decide what kind of housing we have. On the affordable end, I think you can see everybody in the state, maybe everybody in the country is concerned about affordable housing. But I am not sure that the issue is being driven by regulation as much as the market and the question of, do we build houses so people will come, or do we build houses because people are here and don't have a place to live? When I moved into Northfield 55 years ago, Northfield was St. Olaf, Carlton, and as described by one of the local officials, the VFW. He kind of implying that the only other people in town were the people here to support the plumbers and electricians and the car mechanics to take care of the people at the colleges. And there was no housing. My wife and I couldn't place to live. My co-workers were moving, finding places in Lonsdale, Cannon Falls, Faribault, Edina. They had to move to find housing. So housing is complex, and I don't think the regulations by the city, one way or the other, are going to have a big effect on that.
Thank you. Mr. Colby, does the LDC impede life cycle housing being built in Northfield, and what changes would you make to stimulate development?
Well, I did work on the LDC when I was on the Planning Commission, and what I said at the time we began to rewrite that thing was it was a mistake. I still believe that. Writing 10 pages of regulations or statute is hard. They wrote, I believe, somewhere around 200 pages. That's really a massive undertaking. So would I support a rewrite of the Land Development Code? Yes, I would. I've certainly heard a number of complaints about it. Now, what is the impact on life cycle housing? I don't know. That is a good question. When I've been told by the Habitat for Humanity folks in our area that it costs them $100,000 for the materials to build a house. Labor isn't included. I mean, it's too much. The average working person is having great difficulty affording the purchase of a home. I don't know how we tackle that, but we have to do it. As a community, it makes no sense not to have working people living in homes. Now, we do have new housing builds in Northfield. It's not as though our community isn't growing, because it is. I believe there were 26 new homes built in the last month. That data is a little sketchy, so. But the problem of affordable housing has to be addressed by the people who are involved in that business and who have a great interest in it. Certainly Habitat does. They do great work. But I am certainly not an expert, but we have to do better with it.
All right, thank you. Mr. Dennison, would you like me to repeat the question?
Oh, I'm good. The LDC was rewritten once when I was on the council. I believe it's been rewritten again since. I would definitely be in favor of looking at the LDC and what the problems are. For starters, I think Northfield has a problem of always making it way too long, which means way too cumbersome, versus other communities. Other communities should be looked at what is helping them prosper. I recognize Northfield is a little unique to most of our surrounding communities, but that doesn't mean we can't bring in some contractors, or Lord knows that dirty word, consultants, and tell the city council, to tell the city what the market wants, what the market can bear, what the market can afford, and what is in the LDC that is inhibiting that. I'm sure, I haven't looked at it recently, but I'm sure the laundry list would just grow quite rapidly if we got some expertise in there. So I would definitely be in favor of looking at it and doing whatever the city can to encourage workforce housing is my number one priority. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, and remember, each candidate will have up to 2 minutes to answer. And we'll start with you, Mr. Dennison. In light of the growth of economic development in Faribault and Dundas, would you say Northfield is not business friendly? If yes or no, what is your reasoning?
Something is happening. Something is encouraging businesses to look in other communities. It's always been a question what it is in Northfield. It's this elephant in the room. No one can seem to put their finger on it, but we know it's there. Well, maybe we should just go to Aldi's and ask them what made them choose Dundas over Northfield. Maybe we should go to Faribault and talk to their EDA and see what tools they're using to encourage their economic development boon. But though that kind of economic development is all fine and dandy, and I'm all for it, but I'm looking for bigger fish. Like I said, I think I work in healthcare. I'm intimately familiar with it, and I think it's a growth field. Definitely with our aging population, Northfield likes to talk about life cycle housing, cradle to retirement, and keeping people here in Northfield throughout their life cycle. Healthcare is a huge part of that. I would be interested in having conversations with the hospital and Mayo at trends they're seeing and what the city could do to help promote not only the hospital, but any support services that might think about wanting to develop in that area near where their customers are. And I think that's probably the biggest thing the city can, in my mind, the city could do to encourage economic development with a Northfield flavor to it.
Thank you. Mr. McGee, in light of the growth of economic development in Faribault and Dundas, would you say Northfield is not business-friendly? If yes or no, what is your reasoning?
Okay, yes, no, or maybe. I know there's a lot of anecdotal information about that Northfield is not business-friendly, and I think we can look around and have to say, yeah, there's some evidence that they're not. I'm going back to one of my prior comments. When we have this kind of issue, let's get the facts. Somehow, let's dig in. Let's not. My opinion isn't really worth that much. Nobody else. What we need to look hard at this, and Mr. Dennison suggested consultants. I'm going to suggest that we have these people in town. We have a planning commission. The planning commission is the keeper, the creator and keeper of the land development code. They have had super excellent people on that board who have been kept from being involved in some of these issues. And I would like to see more effort of getting more people involved. I think that the answers are in town. I know some of the answers are going to be some of the population is happy with the land development code and happy that things aren't developing. They have a right to believe that, but we have to decide as a community what measurement do we actually want in terms of the improvement of our business community. I think we have to find a way to make sure that our existing businesses are healthy and growing by their definition, not ours. How they define prosperity? More revenue, more employees. What kind of employees do they need? I think the elected officials and the staff have to get out and about in the community and find out what is it that is holding us back of something, and then what can we do about it?
Thank you. Mr. Colby, in light of the growth of economic development in Faribault and Dundas, would you say Northfield is not business-friendly? If yes or no, what is your reasoning?
I am not a businessman, although I did operate a business for about 12 years when I had my own law office here in Northfield. I understand some of the basic principles, but I think the key to any change in Northfield is that we have to be open to change. We have to be receptive to hearing from others. And I think we are. We held a joint work session with the Economic Development Authority and the Planning Commission on April 11th, 2017. When we proposed the changes to 7th and Division, we were visited on a number of occasions by one of the owners of the auto parts store on 7th. The Witt brothers came to, I believe, 2 meetings. We listened to them. I certainly pounded the table on behalf of the Witt brothers. I mean, I get my car repaired there. I want them to be happy with me. But let's not get carried away with this idea that Northfield is anti-business. I mean, Multimeal and Post are here, Cardinal Glass is here, Multec, Allflex, JBT Food Technology, McLean, and St. Olaf and Carlton. Those guys are still here. Cardinal Glass has been here for what, 25, 30 years? They haven't left. And there's a reason for that. They like it here. We are a unique community. As Mr. Dennison said a couple of minutes ago, St. Olaf and Carlton are major employers. What are they doing up there at St. Olaf? They built the Regents Hall of Natural Sciences, costing $64 million starting back in 2008. Holland Hall is undergoing renovation for $13 million. Carlton is in the middle of a 3 or 4 year project to build an integrated science facility. Construction cost $49 million. We're doing something right in Northfield. Supporting our colleges is part of that, but we have a unique environment here. But being open to change has to be part of that. Thank you.
All right, the next question is, what is your opinion of the parklet on Division Street? Mr. Colby.
The parklet on Division is located, I believe, in front of the bagel shop, and it's one parking space. I've seen a number of them in the Twin Cities. If the shop right in front of it is happy with it, I'm not opposed to it. In fact, I think we need to be innovative. We ought to try new things, see how it works. Nonetheless, we need to keep in mind that one of the major complaints about the changes that we're proposing to Washington Street and Division has to do with removing parking. So removing a parking space, but it's innovative, and I think we need to look at it. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Dennison.
I think it's early. I would definitely be in favor of looking at changes, especially if the business that has it in front is not happy with it or it causes problems. It is just one space, so I'm not against it. I don't think we need one on every block. I don't want to see this get out of control. It goes with, I think, along with the idea I proposed of looking at, to address this so-called parking problem downtown, alternative solutions should be looked at. That's one of them. I think enforcement of parking is another. Maybe some more signage and particular spots dedicated to certain times or certain areas. Another, I'm all for looking at innovative, unique ways to address this so-called problem downtown, which I don't think is much of a problem.
All right, thank you. And Mr. McGee, what is your thoughts on the parklet?
It's a dumb idea and we shouldn't do it. I think that if we're going to tie that into the parking issue, I think parking has to be addressed. It keeps being swept under the rug. It's been mentioned here, the business owners in the 7th and Division neighborhood have complained, and rightly so, that 27 parking places are going to be removed. And point out that's within the block of the Eminent Brewery and the Armory Event Center. When the Planning Commission approved all of the permits and whatever else they needed to put those businesses there, the Planning Commission was more than enthusiastic about helping those new businesses. But the Planning Commission also raised the question of, well, hey, with those businesses going in, are there parking issues being created? And they were told by the staff that it was none of their business to worry about parking spaces and that they could not look at any parking issues in that area. I think the parking has to be addressed, and it has to be addressed with the stakeholders involved. I mean, they're the ones that know, the people in the stores. Are people coming in and saying, hey, I had to walk too far or not? I mean, I don't have a parking problem downtown personally. I walk down. Occasionally, under duress, I'll ride my bike down, but I am not very happy doing that. But when I do drive my car, I find places to park, but there are times of the day, times of the week, when you need parking places. And although we walk and we have bikes, we still have thousands of cars in town, and we need a place to park them.
Thank you. All right, remember, each candidate will have up to 2 minutes to answer the following question, and Mr. McGee, will start with you. The council just developed their 3-year strategic plan. What is your opinion of that plan?
My opinion is deja vu all over again. The council went through this exact same exercise back in the Graham Hagenmiller era, and they arrived at the same point we're at now, which is we have, after hours and hours of planning, we have some general categories. Well, we're all for economic development, we're all for affordable housing, we're all for worrying about the climate, etc. But there's no plan. So what does that mean? What are our priorities? And priorities boil down to what project are we going to do this year? What projects are we going to do next year? How are we going to pay for them? When Mr. Mardick came as administrator, he pointed out that the status of the plan at that time had over $20 million worth of projects in queue with no one setting priority, no way to set priorities. The administrator at that time, I asked him, well, when are we going to see that? He said, well, it's in my desk drawer. I'm afraid to pull it out because it's just going to be a big fight over whose priorities are first. We need a process that once and for all sets up a system of setting priorities. And one, we agree what the potential projects are. Two, we identify what they cost. And three, we then put them in a queue of that fits our budget and our time. And it was a question asked someplace along the line of, well, what do we do with new projects? Well, a new project comes along, you go to the end of the line unless, for some reason or other, it has a important impact on the city. But the plan is, as far as I'm concerned, is pretty meaningless until you boil it down to what are we going to do?
Thank you. Mr. Colby, the council just developed their 3-year strategic plan. What is your opinion of that plan?
First of all, we did put a fair amount of effort into it. I think somewhere around 5 or 6 hours of each councilman member was put into that. It was a group process. We did bring in a number of people to help us with it. The 6 objectives are promoting economic development, promoting affordable housing, working on infrastructure, promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, promoting operational effectiveness, which I have to admit I pounded on pretty hard, and doing what we could to address climate change impacts. If you go online and you look at the strategic plan, there are details. There are some blanks, admittedly. But look at affordable housing. It says we need more senior units. We need to expand supportive and emergency housing. We need to grow affordable housing. Where are the specifics? Kester Court Preservation is addressed. Developing senior housing plan, creating a plan for that. Developing the South Bridge property. Workforce housing strategy needs to be created. We do have specifics addressed in that. With infrastructure, we need to increase satisfaction with high-speed internet, resolve major facility projects, and the specifics are coordinate the fire station renovation, coordinate the decision process, which Mr. McGee was just talking about, develop communication and internet strategy, and it goes on. Strategic plans are a good idea because it gives people a roadmap. It doesn't answer all questions and all issues. You have to prioritize. No question about that. You do have to make specific plans as to where you want to go and how you want to get there. We believe the strategic plan is part of that and does address those requirements. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dennison, the council just developed their 3-year strategic plan. What is your opinion of that plan?
The plan is crap. I think it was an effort by the newly elected mayor to do something big to prove that the council can get along and get something done. Because there was this idea that the last council was contentious. The last council just disagreed on some issues. Everybody shouldn't agree on everything. Right now, the current council is primarily made up of people on one side of the fence versus a little more of a clear-cut division in the last council. There's an election every 2 years in this city that results in new people being elected or new ideas coming forward that influence people that get reelected. So 3 years can make it 5 years. It's fluff. It just gives, I really wish we had counselors that would say, 1, 2, and 3, these are my priorities, not 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, let's put them together in a strategic plan that has no substance to it. Advocate something, stand up and say, this is your priority and this is how we're going to fund it. And I don't think the strategic plan that they like to trumpet so often and so proudly about has any meat to it, has any substance to it, and is pure Northfield fluff.
Thank you.
Again, parking. How do you balance the needs of business and parking with safety and aesthetics on the 2018 street reclamation project on Division and 6th and 7th? Mr. McGee, we'll start with you.
Okay, I'm not sure where the balance is. I think obviously the first thing is safety. I'm a pedestrian. I can tell you every day that it is primary thing in your mind as you're trying to traverse the streets, especially as you get downtown. I think aesthetics, certainly we want it to look nice. There's a couple issues with the plan that I have problems with. The one we've talked about, parking over and over. I can see no reason in the world why we can't have parking, angle parking on both sides of 7th Street between Division and Water, which is where the primary parking spaces are. I have a problem with what they call the valley gutters. I think they look very suburban, and I don't think they're going to carry out the look of the historic downtown as you go south. I don't know that we need much landscaping beyond the minimum, some grass and a couple trees. I think any more than that is distracting more than anything. We don't need a raised intersection. I think other than that, I think it's a good project. And I forgot something else I was going to say, but I'll pass.
All right, thank you. Mr. Colby, same question. Would
Could you
like me to
repeat it?
read? Sure.
Aesthetics is mentioned in there, I just can't.
How do you plan to balance the needs of business and parking with safety and aesthetics on the 2018 street reclamation project at Division and 7th? That whole area.
How to balance, yeah. Well, that is a good question. Well, it seems to me that part of the objective of the renovation is that the streets need to be repaved. They're not in very good shape. Second, we do have to address the safety issue because you have a lot of pedestrian traffic to Imminent Brewing on 6th. But there's lots of pedestrian traffic downtown, which is a sign, I think, of how healthy our downtown is. So slowing traffic down is also one of the objectives of this renovation project. Another objective is to pull the downtown southward. Raising the intersection at 7th and Division is probably the biggest issue. My wife has chewed on my ear a couple of times that she does not agree with it. A good friend of mine that I practice law with, or in front of rather, has told me he doesn't agree with that either. So raising that intersection is a challenge. It's a challenge on why it's a good idea. Part of it, again, is to slow traffic down. I would remind you of the comment that Mr. McGee made last week when he was talking about getting our retirement community located down in the Cannon neighborhood next to Wells Fargo Bank and getting them into the downtown. They can't walk up 6th. They have to walk up 7th. If they get to the intersection of 7th and Division, they got to be able to get across the street. You gotta slow traffic down. A number of people have said, why can't you use signs? Traffic slowing is done in a variety of ways, but it's done with visuals, it's done with aesthetics. If you don't think aesthetics are a big deal, I urge you to visit the downtown of Austin and Albert Lea. Makes a heck of a difference. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Dennison, same question.
I'm an avid walker. I'm downtown often. I talk to a lot of business owners. I have never heard a street reclamation project that has as much nervousness, anxiety, anger than this one. Business owners, residents, there just seems to be a lot of confusion about this project. And I'm all for looking at innovative ways to slow traffic down and to help pedestrians, obviously. I'm an avid pedestrian. But maybe this is the wrong way to do it. And I think there are other ways to accomplish the same objectives. Maybe this talk of aesthetics just seems like a word Northfield likes to use, make it so pretty. Maybe other less cheap or less expensive options could be looked at. Maybe Division Street needs speed bumps. Maybe I just don't. I understand the anxieties that are being raised by this, and I think this is a nice first shot at it. Definitely something needs to be done. I just don't think, I think there's a lot of anxiety in the community and not a lot of buy-in on this particular project. And I think that's where the council screwed up on this one. They may have held open houses to talk about it, but I think they may have dropped the ball by not going out to some of the businesses and some of the residents who feel they've been neglected. And the city should make an effort to go to them and not just hold an open house where they show up, expect them to show up.
Thank you. This will be our final question of the forum. And we'll start with you, Mr. Dennison. What is one issue you think is not being addressed? My important issue is affordable housing and the tax burden on the residents. I think it's being addressed quite, at least being brought up by me. That's the biggest reason I run, is to give me the opportunity to bring up things that I don't think are being addressed. I'm glad the liquor store got brought up at this forum. I felt it was a glaring oversight of the last forum, because that's $4 or $5 million that the city plans on spending that I don't think needs to be spent. The return on investment. Maybe that's a good phrase to bring up. Return on investment. The city often looks at projects and says, "Oh, this is going to make this area look nicer," or this is going to, save the environment this way. But maybe one of the criteria in every project should be return on investment, and not just monetarily, but in community goodwill. There's always this idea that there's a lack of parking downtown. There's this idea that Northfield is business unfriendly. Let's start putting some numbers to this idea, and figure out what we can add to the discussion or get input from that that would have an impact on this, and I think return on investment would be one of those important things to look at. Thank you. Mr. McGee, what is one issue you think is not being addressed?
Okay, the one we certainly haven't addressed today, and there's a bunch of them, but we haven't talked about the charter. and there's questions out, why have we chosen to ignore it, and what should it be, how should we follow it? I'd like to address the charter. The charter is over 100 years old. For those who aren't familiar with it, it's about a 30-page document. Just the index is 3.5 pages long, listing all of the rules, regulations, and so forth of the city. I've given this a lot of thought, and there's been a big issue about how do you enforce it? Okay, we've got this charter, but people don't follow it. Well, the people that wrote this charter didn't have that question, because the people that wrote this charter were the people running the city at the time. And this wasn't written as a document to tell people what to do. This was a document that was written to tell people this is what we believe we should be doing when we run the city. Call it the honor system. There was no thought that you wouldn't follow this because this is what we do. So now to turn it into a legal document and say, well, the city attorney says you can do this because it doesn't restrict it or whatever, doesn't make sense. I think the way this has to be enforced is not to be enforced, but to be honored by the people that sit on the council. It is fairly easy for somebody to come in and say, well, I think I can get by with this because it looks like I can get around that issue. I think the attitude on the council should be, hey, this is our guiding document. This is what we should be following. And so I would very much advocate that we start paying attention. Instead of the council interrogating and in some cases insulting the charter representatives that have come to the council, is to sit down with them and understand what it is they should be doing. And I think it can, can I make one statement?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I would just like to say somebody pointed out to me that on our last forum that there was some contentious discussion, and I would like to point out I do not think so. Mr. Colby and Mr. Dennison and I think have had some differences. I think we've had some real informed civil discussion, and I think that's the way it should be, and I think people doing it that way would be in conformance with the charter in any case. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Colby, what is one issue you think is not being addressed?
Well, I think the question of is the city functioning better than it did a year ago? And I think the answer is yes. I think that to characterize what happened last year as trivial is absurd. When the predominant question to me last fall was, why can't the council get along better? Why can't they function? Why can't they get things done? The reality was that they were getting things done, but what was going on in the city council chamber was not good. When I arrived in January, there were very specific rules on how debate could be conducted. I can't use the word objection, and the tension in the room was palpable. I never noticed that when I was in a courtroom. When you had city council members who were shouting at other people in the room and telling the city lawyer that he was fired, when members of the council were fearful of confrontations outside of this chamber, that's ridiculous. Mr. McGee is right. There should be respectful disagreement. That's American government. But when you have the kind of behavior that we were seeing in this council chamber all of last year, that's not healthy. And we are in a much better place. And I don't take complete credit for that. Brad Ness deserves a lot of credit. He's wonderful to work with. And man, nobody on the city council I've ever worked with knows parliamentary rules better than Brad Ness. He's great. So I'm very pleased with how things are going. Now, as to the Charter Commission, where are the lawsuits? If that's not being obeyed, then why aren't there lawsuits? We haven't seen any. This charge about insulting charter members who show up, please be specific. What are you talking about? If it's occurred 2 years ago, then I don't think it's relevant to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you, gentlemen, for all of your answers to our questions today. Now we'll start with our wrap-up and closing remarks. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for their closing remarks. Mr. McGee, we will start with you. 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
Okay, thank you. I think we've covered most everything. I would just like to again thank for this opportunity to be here. I just go on record as saying that if I had the opportunity to serve on the council for this year, I would consider it major accomplishments if in that year I could convince the council to convince the staff that you get monthly true financial reports, expenditures, not just how much we spent, but how are we doing versus budget, how much is in the bank, what are our commitments, why, if something in the budget is out of whack, why, not trying to hang anybody, we have to understand it and how do we fix it. And I would also like to see a process where the boards and commissions are much more involved in the day-to-day work. One effort that I would like to see put in place in the attempt to get more order into it is that require the council to give all direction to the boards and commissions as a motion so that they get a written direction from the council, not from one member of the council that goes to the meeting and may or may not deliver exactly what the council wants. I think the council should send requests to the boards and commissions, and the boards and commissions should come back formally, and the boards and commissions should not be directed or urged to follow the whims of either the staff or the council. Beyond that, I want to reiterate again, I've enjoyed the discussions with Greg and John, and I think, in one way, we've set a model for the way things should be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Colby, 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
Thank you. I want to thank the Chamber of Commerce for this opportunity today. This is a great idea. I think what we need to do is to build on our success of the last several years, pursue the strategic plan of economic development, affordable housing, promoting infrastructure, diversity, equity, and inclusion, operational effectiveness, and climate change impacts. None of this is going to happen without concrete plans. We've got to pursue it. In addition, I would use the building survey on energy use to identify those city buildings that need to be improved and make those corrections. I would connect our city to the state system of trails. Pursuing rail is going to take a long time, but I would look into that as well. Nothing demonstrates the marvelous civic and community success we have had over the last several years more than our newly renovated library. It's an absolute gem. It is a cornerstone of a marvelous downtown. We need to keep both. In addition, we need to continue to work well with our boards and commissions. We heard a presentation from our Environmental Quality Commission on their vision and goals in the city in May of 2017. We had a joint work session with our EDA and the Planning Commission. We received a charter amendment from the Charter Commission, and we have talked with them about it. We heard from the Heritage Preservation Commission regarding expanding the historic district. We had training for boards and commissions where the mayor and 2 council members attended. I was one of them. I have talked with the chair of Arts and Culture Commission, the chair of the Charter Commission, the chair of the Heritage Preservation Commission, as well as members of the EQC, the Housing and Redevelopment Authority, and the Planning Commission. I would ask for your vote to be your city council member at large. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dennison, 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
I've really enjoyed these debates, and for some in the public to think this is contentious, I really question how. In my opinion, our debates are a good example of how good government should work. If we were all like-minded up here, why would there be an election? You know, you have three serious, distinct choices in this election, and I think that's what good government is all about, giving that choice. I served with Councilor Colby on the Charter Commission. We respect each other and are great colleagues on there. Mr. McGee, I don't know as well, but I've been to many meetings and seen him spoken. He's always well-informed, extremely well-informed, very well-spoken about the issues he's passionate about. And he, like myself, he's a strong advocate for pedestrian mobility around town. I can get behind that. There are things we agree on up here, but there are differences. And I think that's what good government is about. Not being an advocate for what you believe in strongly and trying to convince your colleagues the merits of that. And sometimes you don't agree and you get a better product at the end of it because of it. So whoever wins this election, and I do sincerely hope it's me because of the budgeting issues, one counselor can make a difference. But I think this debate has had an impact on everybody up here, and these ideas will carry forward in some way, shape, or form. So please vote November 7th. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank each of the candidates for attending today's Northfield City Council Candidate Forum. Thank you to our media partners, and especially to Terry Knight of KYMN Radio for being one of our moderators. Thank you for attending the forum. Have a great day, and remember to vote on Tuesday, November 7th. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd.